Looking back on Smash Bros. Legacy TE, looking back at the Animelee MEX projects and the Melee modding projects I did, I always wondered what's the common thread in all these projects that I enjoy doing. And so I decided to distill it down in some concepts. I distilled down to four key concepts: atomic projects, emergent projects, opinionated starter kits, and piggyback projects. These elements are they all kind of work together in a certain way, and I'll explain that in a second. So first of all, an atomic project is a self-contained initiative that can be basically amplified when connected to a bunch of other atomic projects, which creates an emergent project. So as an example for that, one of the earliest things we did for Legacy TE was create these one-to-one stages, these tournament or otherwise stages in Project M that were used, but with a new style, with a new theme, with a new coat of paint, so to speak. So this is Green Hill Zone, but it's in Hyrule, so it's Hyrule Zone. This is Peach's story, which is Yoshi's story, but using Peach's castle as a theme. So Halberd Land is Dreamland with halberd aesthetic, and sometimes it can lead to pretty wacky designs, but often they're quite popular because when you play the same stages over and over, the benefit is the visual variety, the audio variety for the music choices, things like that. So that's how that was born. And after that, from there, one thing led to another, and it became Legacy TE, this emergent project. And I would say it was an architected emergent project. So some are sort of spontaneous or organic, where it starts off as something small and kind of grows into something bigger. This was a deliberate choice. When I had the vision for Legacy TE, I wanted a premier tournament build for Project M that was easy to customize, so tournament organizers could easily go in and make it their own, but it also served a purpose on its own. And so I would consider that a type of architected emergent project. And that brings me to the type that it is. Here's the web page that kind of goes over it. You can see, even though Legacy TE was this emergent project, it was comprised of all these other components. So, there was a custom costume maker, masquerade tool. You could set the number of costumes. There's a stage tool for it. All these little individual atomic projects rolled into this broader project. So that brings us to a type of architected emergent project, which is an opinionated starter kit. This is different than just your standard template because, while it does serve the purpose of a template, which Legacy TE was its aim, as a team member Johan coined, Legacy TE was not supposed to be the best Project M build, but the best base build. But it was still a great base build. So it had its own coat of paint, had its own style, its own opinionated choices. We had costumes that we wanted to include, we had stages we wanted to include, but they sort of were in service of a broader goal, which was, here's a template you can use to kind of make your own, but also it serves totally great purposes on its own. Another example would be the Animelee MEX project. So what I really like about Animelee MEX was
Animelee MEX.
here's me talking, was it was even more explicit about that connection. So for example, it was not just Animelee, like the base game, but it was also, you could pick, it was also this dynamic stage cycle code that Uncle Punch created, so you could pick between those. It was bug fixes and quality of life improvements that were not part of the mainline Animelee MEX. It was little improvements like having Crystal Melee Zelda so that you could play doubles more easily without a crash. It was HUD upgrades, things like that made it more cohesive that were not part of base Animelee, the HUD timer, the stock icons, the percentages, all full Kirby hats, stuff that other community members made that didn't make it into full Animelee. The custom Animelee effects that Professor Randall made, obviously a perfect fit for it. And so there are just so many of these aspects and these elements that just made sense to wrap it all into one project. Additional costumes, and of course it was all built on this MEX system, which was a project in its own right, another atomic project. And so this opinionated starter kit had the custom shield, it had the custom shine, it had a really minimal pause screen. It had the HD pack included in it. It assumed you wanted to have Dolphin emulator on, playing on NetPlay with Slippy, with the HD custom loaded feature on. So that's a great example of it. And the last one I'll talk about is a piggyback project. Now, all these that we've mentioned so far are a piggyback project. It basically builds on, or it adopts, the system base or framework of an existing project, leveraging its foundation to accelerate the development or extend its capabilities. Legacy TE and Animelee MEX perfectly encapsulate this idea as well. And so I think, there's a lot of different ways it can come about, but I think the cross-section of these things, especially when something's kind of all these things put together, that's what I really resonate with. I love the idea of working on a bunch of little projects that are really helpful and useful and solve some use case, but then also when combined with other ones, just create this this exponentially beneficial effect. And so the illustration here is you start with a vision, let's say, and it might lead to an atomic project where, I think it'd be cool to make a stage that people could play on. That's basically Dreamland, but not, with different music in a different setting. And then it can snowball in the positive sense, not in the negative sense, and become an emergent project. And in this case, it's through the opinionated starter kit of Legacy TE, or maybe I'll want to work on something like, let's say, let me find the example here. Okay, so here's my SSBM textures. By the way, this site's going away very soon, but that's beside the point. So I made these costumes. I made remastered Dreamland, this HD texture overhaul for Animelee. I commissioned someone to create these costumes and made some custom stages myself, and all this rolled up into either Animelee MEX, which you just saw, or I made a custom build. So that's the other really cool thing about this, is I could create showcases of this working by doing it myself. I could take the opinionated starter kit that I made and go down the rabbit hole further with more opinionation, if that's a word, with my little tweaks, the things that I wanted, the things I wouldn't consider would be appropriate for a base build. Like too opinionated, you could say. But this is an example of what you could do with yours. So I just absolutely love that stuff. And so, but of course, all this builds off of the fact that it's based on Melee. It's a Melee mod. And it goes further by it's based on Animelee, which is another layer. And Legacy TE was very similar to that. It was based on Project M, which of course was based on Super Smash Bros. Brawl. And so that's the connection there. That's where the piggyback part comes in. And both projects were opinionated starter kits. Well, one thing I've been struggling to do with this YouTube channel is I wanted to try to figure out how I can connect the things that I did in the past that I really loved and enjoyed doing with what I love doing now. In fact, I can even use the Smash Melee documentary that I made, Elevated, as another aspect of this. It was concerted efforts by many different people, a lot of different atomic projects documenting this part of Melee's history. Somebody went to a tournament and wrote it down. Somebody collected a bunch of merchandise about Melee and wrote it down. Somebody, interviewed someone that was at E3. And so all these collective pieces, we have little fragments of interviews from developers, rolling them all together into one emergent project, taking these little atomic projects and merging into one. That's what Elevated was. So I'm trying to think about how to bring that into what I'm into now. Here you can see like a brief table example of the crossover. So Legacy TE is more than a template. It's an opinionated starter kit, but Animelee MEX template is a bit more of a template, a little bit less opinionated because it left a lot of blank content for you to fill in and for you to replace. Mushroomy Cavern, which is one of the stages we looked at earlier, it's an atomic project and it's a piggyback project, but it's not a larger emergent project. It's not made of a bunch of different components. It's not a template. But interestingly, the cosmetic standardization project was actually all of these aspects. The reason why it was an atomic project is because it was one piece of the broader ecosystem of the tools that were available for tournament organizers that did Project M, and even fans that wanted to get their costumes used by tournament organizers or in these builds that maybe didn't have the capability or skill to render it themselves. It was emergent as well because in and of itself it was a Blender. It was a component that worked in Blender. There was a component that worked in GIMP, and they all rolled together to become this suite of tools. And it's piggyback, obviously, because it wouldn't work without Project M. It wouldn't work without Blender or GIMP, these other tools. It was an opinionated starter kit because all these poses were already decided, but you could go in and you could do your own costume, or you could even do your own poses, which people did. And of course, it was also a template. So, the Masquerade tool is an example of something that was an atomic project, but wasn't necessarily an emergent one or a template of any kind. It was just sort of a tool, a supplemental tool. So that leads me to this. The Vault CMS is the latest thing that I'm working on, and it's another kind of project like this. It has nothing to do with Smash. It is entirely to do with using this really cool note-taking app called Obsidian and creating and writing blog posts. And so it looks like this. This is a very opinionated, edited version of Obsidian, and it has all the things that you would expect a content management system to have. And I'm very, very excited to share it with you. I'm not really going to share the details of it in this video. All you have to know is it is in the same line as these other things. This is a emergent project that came out of a bunch of atomic projects. Alias File Name History is a plugin that I made. Astro Composer is a plugin that I made. Astro Modular Settings is a plugin I made. Basis CMS is a fork of a plugin that I modified. So all these are things that I've touched or tweaked to make this as easy as possible. If you wanted to make a blog or a website, all this is open source and it works with Git. And it's so much fun to work on. I absolutely love it. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments, or if you have questions about it, I'll drop a link if you're curious about this. But how it works is, like, Astro is a really quick way to make websites, and Obsidian is just an amazing tool to use to write content in Markdown or otherwise. And so this is a convergence of those two things. So going back to kind of our chart, right, I would say it's not necessarily an atomic project, but it's certainly an emergent one. It's made up of all these plugins and all these pre-configured settings. It's a piggyback one because it goes off of the Obsidian and Astro frameworks. It just kind of merges them, and it's very much an opinionated starter kit. So, anyhow, this is my attempt to get to move forward into my current interests and the things that I'm working on right now. I know that's a big departure from this channel, but a lot of you indicated you'd be okay with going along for the journey. And hey, if no one watches, I'm perfectly fine with that. I just appreciate that for those that are here. Hey, I super appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Have a good one. God bless.